Hello, Trail Seeker, and welcome to another exciting episode of the Learn True Health podcast. I loved today's interview. Our guest is an expert in fish and omegas and all the questions we have about fish, whether they're safe or healthy or toxic, filled with mercury or filled with Fukushima radiation. Everything, all those different questions we may have about sustainability, whether farmed fish is better or wild caught, why we'd even want to eat fish. Maybe you're someone who never eats fish. Why would you even want to eat fish, and would you want to eat fish? So we go through all that, and parasites, all the questions that people have around eating fish or not eating fish, and whether it's a good thing or not a good thing. Now, my guest has a website in which he sells some food produce and organic produce, and I asked him to give you a coupon code. I love asking my guests to give coupon codes to the listeners so I can pass on savings to you guys, and then we all benefit. So the coupon code is LTH2018, and that's going to be in the show notes of today's podcast. The show notes are located, either you can go to learntruehealth.com and see this episode on the website at learntruehealth.com, or in your podcast player, there's usually notes below the episode, and that's where you'll find it there as well. So it is LTH2018 that gives you 10% off. And the website is vitalchoice.com. Of course, this is going to be discussed in the interview, vitalchoice.com, which is our guest's website. Really interesting information. Definitely want to share it with your friends who are fish eaters, or your friends who have diseases that may be related to a deficiency in omegas, like skin conditions and blood and heart conditions. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for being a listener, and enjoy today's interview. Welcome to the Learn True Health podcast. I'm your host, Ashley James. This is episode 277. Well, today we're in for a huge treat. We are going to dive into a very controversial topic and bust a lot of myths when it comes to the fishing industry. I'm really excited about this because I have heard both sides of the story, and it leaves people more confused than ever. Randy Hartnell is very passionate about teaching us the reason why we really want to incorporate omega-3s into our life, the scary things that happen to our health when we have an imbalance of omega-3 and omega-6, and what we can do to make sure our diet is full of omega-3s. So Randy, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ashley. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. Now, I'm pretty sure that one of my naturopathic friends asked me to contact you to get you on the show. A lot of times people solicit to try to get on my show to promote, their own, companies. But we reached out to you because you are an expert in understanding the fishing industry, understanding how to get high quality fish, how to get high quality omegas. And I have recently seen some studies where children who ate fish at least once a week had higher IQs. I was really excited about that. Have you seen those kind of studies?
Yes, I'm very familiar not only with the studies, but with the lead author, who is a close friend of mine. His name is Joe Hiblin. He's at he's at NIH in Washington, and also Gene Goldberg, who is in the UK. That study is called the ALSPAC study, Avon Longitudinal Study of Parents and Children. And basically, that was a study looking at 14,000 moms and their kids, and took place over a long period of time. It's probably been 20 to 30 years now. And they were testing and watching to see what the impact of fish consumption was on the neurological health of these children as they were born and grew up. And when they began, they fully expected that the moms who had the highest mercury levels from eating the most fish would have offspring that had the most developmental problems. But it turned out to be just the opposite. So Basically, the takeaway was that the risks of not eating fish are much greater than those associated with the trace levels of methyl mercury.
Oh, very interesting. Now, so we always have to be a little bit like detectives when we see these kind of studies, especially ones that may be favorable for food companies, right? I've seen these studies that say, eating 3 tablespoons of sugar is healthy for a child. And then you realize that like Mars bars or Nestle or Kellogg's was the company behind um, funding the study. So it turned out in their favor. Do you know who was funding this study?
I know that a big part of the funding came from the National Institutes of Health, and offhand, I don't recall who else funded it, but it's very credible. It was published in Lancet magazine, Lancet Medical Journal, and but that is a great question. I'm a big fan of Michelle Simon, who wrote a book called Appetite for Profit, and she talks about exactly that subject, that
Oh,
you really have to be careful who's funding
right.
these studies. I have a friend who's a doctor, and he has told me that he's been approached by different companies to participate in studies, and when he looks at the design, he can see that they're designed to fail. Uh, omega-3 studies and whatnot. So yeah,
Oh,
it's
very interesting.
really great point that you've got to look beneath the headlines when you see it.
Right. There was a study that came out that said vitamin E supplementation or vitamin E increases the prostate cancer. And then you have to really dive into the study to find out that it was a synthetic form of vitamin E they were using. I mean, it's synthetic, no wonder.
It's just so true. I mean, there are probably 30,000 at last count, 30,000 studies looking at omega-3 fatty acids, both in fish and supplements. I think about 80% of those have shown positive benefits. But in fact, there have been so many that it's not really news to a lot of people anymore. And what the media gravitates to are the sort of the sensational headlines that defy conventional wisdom. So we've been told for, probably 20 years now that omega-3s and fish oil are good for us. But the thing the media loves are the ones that say, latest study says fish oil doesn't, stop heart disease or that kind of thing. So
Mm-hmm.
uh, we all see it every day how the media gravitates to
The
the
negative.
bad news, and it's
Right.
these sort of Stone Age brains that we carry around that are attracted to threats and bad news and
That's a really good point, and I know my listeners are here to learn all about the good news
yeah.
today. Now, your website's vitalchoice.com. I'm on it right now, and of course, it's making me incredibly hungry because it's a beautiful website. And then you soon will be launching your own personal website because you're going to come out with a book. So your personal website is randyhartnell.com, and of course, the links to everything that Randy does is going to be in the show notes of today's podcast at learntourhealth.com. Randy, I'd love to just dive into your story. What had you get into the fishing industry and become such a passionate advocate and expert about omega-3? Can you tell us your story?
I'd be happy to, sure. So many years ago, I was going to college. I was pursuing an English degree at the University of California at Berkeley, and I was from Washington State, so I was paying an out-of-state tuition that was pretty expensive, and I needed to find a good summer job, and that led me to go fishing in Alaska in the summers. And I intended just to do that during the course of my uh, days at school, and then plan to go on to law school. But a funny thing happened. I fell totally in love with commercial fishing in Alaska and just being out on the water. And so when I graduated with my English degree, I decided that I was going to continue being a fisherman full time. And that's what I ended up doing. I bought my own boats and hired my own crews. And for 20 years, would go to Alaska every spring and summer and catch herring and salmon and basically made a living doing that and absolutely loved it. It's just something primal, and it's kind of the last of the hunter gatherer occupations, and physical, and just really a great lifestyle. And I probably would have still been doing that, except for the rise of industrial farm salmon on the world markets. In the late 90s, farm salmon kind of exploded. And we were kind of, I don't know, maybe a little arrogant and naive. We thought, well, these wild salmon that we're catching are just so incredible, so healthy, so sustainable, just so different than farm salmon that certainly our markets wouldn't forsake us for, leave us and go to farm salmon. But we were totally wrong, because farm salmon, in spite of the nutritional environmental disadvantages, at that time, very few consumers knew the difference. And what grocery stores and chefs understood was that farm salmon was now available 24/7. It was cheap, it was perfectly consistent, and consumers didn't know the difference. And so, in the space of a couple of years, even though the fish were still coming in big numbers, I was still catching a lot of them with my crews. And but at the end of the year, the price had collapsed to the point where I couldn't even afford to pay my crew,
Oh, wow.
and it was just really a devastating time. I'd over the course of that 20 years had earned sort of the equivalent of a PhD in commercial fishing or catching
Right.
fish that was worth almost nothing at the time. And so I had to figure out something else to do. And it was really a difficult uh, time for the whole industry. 'Cause there were a lot of people like me out there that were, now what the heck do we do? And I had a call from a friend one day who was being proactive. He was going around he was going and selling his fish to grocery stores. And part of the deal was that he would show up with his barbecue and he would cook these wild Alaskan salmon out in front of the stores and tell the story about why they were different, superior to the farm salmon that other stores had. And he called me up one night. He asked me to go to dinner, and he sat down. He goes, "Randy, I think I've got a tiger by the tail. When people learn the difference, when they understand how different wild salmon is from farm salmon, they absolutely want it. The problem is they can't find it." He said, "You should come with me on one of these trips." So I did. Experienced exactly what he was talking about. People just loved the wild salmon, loved the story, and but they couldn't get it because very few stores had it. They could get it that weekend that we might be at a particular store, but other than that, it was very hard to come by. And for most people in this country, it still is. But one day, a woman asked me, she was just very distraught, and she really wanted this wild salmon other than that weekend. And she said, where can I get it? And I said, well, how about if I send you some? And that was really the start of, that was the light bulb moment when I thought, huh. And then after that, things just kind of unfolded. I came home. I happened to just serendipitously see an Omaha Steaks commercial on television. I came to learn that they were selling about $80 million a year of red meat that you can buy in pretty much any grocery store. It's not organic. There's nothing really that special about it other than they deliver it to your door. And so basically, I ended up building Vital Choice, having hired some friends who were sort of shared my situation, and also some family members, and launched the company in 2002. And we've grown every year since then for close to 16, 17 years now.
Wow. And now you sell more than just fish though. I see you have something called a Vital Box and your website says wild seafood and organics. So what are the main sellers when people come to your site? What are the big sellers? What are the things that people normally have shipped to them?
Well, that's a good question. As we have grown over the years, we've had people ask about different products, and we've added them. And one problem people were having is they'd get to our website and they would just kind of be overwhelmed by all the options. And so we created the Vital Box subscription program, which is essentially sort of our greatest hits, our most popular products. And it's not necessary that people buy a subscription, but that's one solution that's really easy for people to sort of sign up and get a few boxes and figure out what they like and become familiar with the service. And then we can customize the timing and the product mix to their preference after that.
I can also see this would be a great gift. I'm thinking of like two friends right off the bat that would just love that as what a unique gift to send to someone.
It really is, especially seafood lovers. I travel a lot and I have an opportunity to eat in restaurants, and I always, almost always, will order some seafood dish uh, if it's available. And I would say at least half the time the fish is started to turn, is rancid,
Oh.
fishy, and so there's just a lot of bad fish out there. And the unfortunate result of that is a lot of people actually believe that that's the way fish is supposed to taste. Somewhere along the line, they got served a rancid piece of seafood, and they just decided they didn't like seafood. So one of the things we enjoy most is sort of enlightening people that fish can actually be one of the most delicious, in addition to being healthy, one of the most delicious foods. It's easy to prepare and really good for you, and you just have to get good quality product. And what happens is those healthy omega-3 fats in the fish, they're very unstable. The polyunsaturated fats that are prone to oxidation, and that's one reason that chefs prefer farm salmon. Wild salmon, they bring it in and intermittently, and they pay more for it, and it goes bad quickly, relatively quickly, and so they end up having to throw some of it out. Whereas farm salmon, they can get it fresh every day, and that's a big advantage if you're watching your bottom line.
So that's why in restaurants you seldom have wild caught salmon. But
That's right.
but let's talk about we have so many questions obviously. I definitely want to get into the ethical, environmental, advantages and disadvantages because I think there's a lot of either myths or misconception or just horror stories that have been
Hmm.
shared, and we need to understand it. I had a friend who's an MD who actually gave up her license as a medical doctor because she didn't want to be a pill pusher, and went on to be a holistic, almost like a holistic health coach, where she helped people, like what now is considered a functional medicine practitioner, but this was before, like she was a pioneer, and she believed, she was from BC, and she thought that fish farming was the best thing in the world, and there was absolutely no environmental impact, that it was the healthier choice, that it was healthier for the environment. But now we start to hear things like that overfeed them antibiotics, that they that there's a huge environmental impact. So we're like, what do we do? Because on one hand we have sustainability, right? And on the other hand we have like antibiotics, and these fish are basically fed, the farm fish are fed like ground up dead fish, and it's kind of gross. So and totally like unhealthy for them. So then of course then they're not producing a healthier meat, right? So I definitely want to get into that. Um and I'd love to talk about mercury. We're going to cover all that. So when you're talking to a customer, when you're standing there and you're explaining to them the difference between farmed and wild caught, can you walk us through understanding the environmental and health disadvantages, as you said, of farmed salmon?
Sure. I always like to preface this discussion with a comment that I am definitely not anti-aquaculture, anti-seafood farming. It has the potential to be one of the most sustainable food systems that we can develop. Farmed shellfish is, as long as it's grown in clean waters, is incredibly sustainable. You don't need to put any, basically it's zero input other than labor. So I'm not anti-fish farming per se. It's salmon in particular that are a problem. And again, I'm generalizing here. This is probably true for 99% of the farm salmon that's out there. The problems fall into two categories. One is environmental, the impact that the farm salmon industry has on the local ecosystem, and though everything that you're putting into those cages to feed those fish, a lot of that ends up in the surrounding environment and can have an impact on the local species. One of the big problems up in British Columbia that you may have be familiar with is uh, they have placed hundreds of farm salmon pens along the migration routes of wild Pacific salmon, 5 different species of wild Pacific salmon. And so the adult salmon make their way up into the Fraser River and other rivers along the BC coast. And when the eggs hatch and the smolt, the baby salmon, migrate out into the ocean, they have to transit through this gauntlet of these salmon farms, and any diseases, any parasites. They light the farms, and so a lot of times the little fish will be attracted to the light, and they'll go right into the pens and become supplemental nutrition. So anyway, so that's one big problem. One thing that we're passionate about is trying to educate people to help get those farms at least out of those areas. If you go over to where salmon farming was first started over in Norway, they will tell you that the farms there have devastated the wild salmon stocks. And I talked to a scientist over there a few years ago, and he said that BC is absolutely insane to put salmon farms along wild salmon migration routes. So anyway, that's one problem.
Well, the whole point of farming salmon, so keeping them in these big nets in, like the Fraser
Net
River, like
pens,
you said,
yes.
pens. The whole point was to help sustainability, right? Now we're not tapping into the ocean, so now because we're growing our own, so we're helping sustainability, but they're destroying it.
There have been efforts the solution is to move those pens onto land and do closed containment tanks. And there have been efforts to do that. The problem is now all of a sudden you don't have Mother Nature subsidizing your processing of your sewage, you're pumping the water, you've got to move the water in and out. And so it's a lot more expensive. So consequently, the farm salmon that is raised sustainably is more expensive and doesn't have as much of a market for it. Now it's about the same as wild salmon. And so anyway, those approaches have largely they haven't proliferated just for that reason, that if you try to raise farm salmon sustainably in closed containment tanks, it's just a lot more expensive. But the other issue that I mentioned is sort of the nutritional side. You mentioned that their farm salmon are fed wild fish, and that's true. A lot of the anchovies and sardines are caught, and oftentimes like the Peruvian anchovy fishery, and those fish are captured and then moved to North America and other places around the world where they're rendered and turned into pellets that are fed to the farm salmon. The problem is when you do that, the fish, which might have just trace levels of contaminants, when you concentrate them and render them, those contaminants get concentrated. And so, 10 years ago or so, there was a lot of information in the news about how farm salmon had the highest much higher mercury levels, PCB levels than wild salmon. So if you're a salmon farmer, how are you going to deal with that? Well, you're going to feed them less of that product. So you've got to figure out something else to feed them. And it's also very expensive compared to subsidized corn and soybeans and all these things these subsidized crops that we feed cows and pigs and chickens and pretty much everything, the other bit of livestock that we consume. So the industry has been gravitating toward getting as much grain into the diets of these farm salmon as possible. So lowering the cost, and reducing the contaminant load, but changing the nutritional profile. So, one of the things I think we're going to talk about a little later is the omega-3, omega-6 issue. These different types of very bioactive fats that are essential to our health and well-being that you normally get from fish. When you start feeding these farm salmon a lot of grains, you dramatically alter that ratio. So you have way more omega-6s, fewer omega-3s. There's still some omega-3s in there to the extent they're still feeding them fish byproducts, but far fewer. So that's why wild salmon will have way more omega-3s compared to omega-6s. It will have vitamin D. There's the whole issue with the color of the flesh. Wild salmon eat this algae and these krill that give it this beautiful pink or red color. Farm salmon don't get that, and so they have their diet supplemented with synthetic carotenoids to
Do you,
create that color.
so wait, they're fed dye?
Well, I don't know if I would call it dye. I mean, it's a chemical called astaxanthin. It's similar to what wild salmon eat, only it's a synthetic version of it. So it's not identical, chemically identical. Now, I've seen articles where the industry claims it's the same thing the fish get in the wild, but it's not. When I'm one of those things that I've dug into, and it's a different isomer. So the chemistry students out there will understand that probably better than I do. But the way one scientist explained it to me, it's like when when the salmon are consuming the natural astaxanthin from the algae that's in their food web, it's sort of like putting a right-hand glove on your right hand. When you try to feed them a synthetic astaxanthin molecule, it's been manufactured from petrochemicals, that's of a different isomer, it's like trying to put a left-hand glove on your right hand. And the consequence is that it's not as bioavailable to the fish. And they've actually done studies where the fish fed the synthetic astaxanthin had lower growth rates than the ones eating the natural astaxanthin. So not to get too deep in the weeds, but that's the pretty strong evidence that they're not the same.
Oh my gosh. Like what they're feeding them is a synthetic astaxanthin that's derived from petrochemicals?
I can't speak for every salmon farmer in the
Right.
world, but that was the case, when I first started looking into this. I mean, some salmon farmers may very well be feeding them the specific algae that produces astaxanthin, but again, it's much more expensive. We buy it as a supplement for our customers, and it's much more expensive than the synthetic version. So, where one of the big advantages of farm salmon is a lower cost. Most growers are not willing to spend that extra money.
Right. Right. Really interesting. Now I heard that what they found is that near the Puget Sound, where they have fish farms, that they discovered that beneath the fish farms, the where there's supposed to be life, right? There's supposed to be something, there's life
Hmm.
right at the bottom, basically the bottom of the Puget Sound. There, it's now totally dead. It's a dead zone, and that's from all the antibiotics, and also all of the waste, the poop, the fish poop. It's just kind of is killing the environment, the ecosystem around the farms. Have you heard about this?
Oh yes, yeah. That's basically dead zones around the farms. Um, not every farm is the same. Some people are trying to do a better job of it, but in general, 95% of what's out there is not very sustainable. And you can go to any of a growing number of marine sustainability websites and organizations, and farm salmon is usually red listed. There are some exceptions. There are some land-based farming operations that do get a pass, but that's just one of the reasons. Antibiotics, the devastating toll it takes on the local environment, just some of the reasons that farm salmon is best off and avoided.
Now, what about those who say that wild caught fish, the fishing industry is unsustainable, that in a matter of a few generations, we will have fished everything out of the ocean, and that it's also unsustainable because I heard something for every fish that's caught, like a tuna, for example, there's five other species that are caught up in the nets that then die or are discarded, and so it's wasteful. Can you speak to that argument?
One of my favorite questions, because there's actually some good news to be shared there. We definitely have destroyed a lot of fisheries around the world, but there, like a lot of things, there's a lot of gray area there. There's some good and some bad. And I fished in Alaska for 20 years, and the thing about Alaska is not a lot of people understand is that Alaska pursued statehood from the federal government in large part to take control of their fisheries back from the government, which was mismanaging them when they were a territory. And
Mm.
so when they wrote the state constitution, they wrote right in there that the fisheries would be managed on a sustainable yield basis. So what does that mean? It means, and I sort of lived in the midst of that for a long time, so I understand it intimately. And what I can tell you is that every river that has fish coming back to it is managed by a scientist. And his primary goal is to make sure that every season when the fish come back, enough get up into the river to ensure that the run will perpetuate. And so they manage the fisheries on what they call a sustainable yield basis. So for instance, the fishery that I participated in, the river that I fished on most of the time, had an optimum escapement level. Escapement is a number of fish needed to populate the spawning grounds. He would be looking for 2 million fish. And so what they do is when the fish start coming back in the summer, they have different ways of counting, and they'll have test fisheries to check the flow. They'll have planes that fly over counting. They'll have people, actually college students, actually sitting up in towers counting fish that are going through, and basically monitoring the passage of fish into the rivers. And what they'll do is as they see that they're getting the fish they need, they'll give the fishermen maybe a 6-hour opportunity to go fishing, and then they'll shut it down. And then this will continue until they get their 2 million fish, or they're assured of getting their 2 million fish. And then everything else that comes back is what they call a harvestable surplus. And the amazing thing is, this river that I fished in, one year we had 20 million fish come back. And so that meant that 2 million fish went up there. Actually, there were so many fish we couldn't stop them all. And so I think there was pretty significant over escapement. But anyway, the fantastic news is that all of the fisheries in Alaska are managed like that. And now that not all fish are going up rivers, of course, but they all have biologists that are in charge of monitoring the biomass, monitoring the harvest. They've got enforcement, the fish cops that are out there making sure people behave themselves. People are, will try to get more than their share if they can, just like anywhere else. But generally, they do a fantastic job. The consequence of that is that the fisheries are incredibly healthy. Right now, the biggest salmon run in the world is going on up in Bristol Bay, Alaska, and they're predicting the big million sockeye salmon are pouring into that area right now, and that's because they've been managing it well for 50 or 60 years now, and 58 years, I guess. And even more important than that is they protected the habitat. So they've banned salmon farming. You won't find a salmon farm in Alaska. And the rivers are pristine. They don't have heavy industry on them, logging, dams, tourism. So it's a great story. The other thing is, in general, people have become more conscious about this. That article that you mentioned, the headline about "We're fishing the ocean's empty," that came out, I think, about 12 years ago, from a guy named Daniel Pauly. And it was very alarmist. The media, there was like one line in there that said something like, "If we don't do something, we could fish out the oceans." But of course, it made for great headlines. And so here we are 12 years later, and you remember that, and I remember it, and a lot of people do. And it's just a great example of how our impressions can be influenced by one bad headline. The truth is that consumers are demanding sustainable seafood. There are over 30 NGOs now focused on ocean sustainability, and fisheries around the world are recovering, stabilizing, improving. There's definitely still some work to do, but in general, most of the seafood in the United States, or at least the salmon, come from Alaska because they've done such a good job up there, and there aren't very many people competing for habitat with the salmon. So pretty much any halibut, cod, pollock, any of the 5 different wild salmon species, if it comes from Alaska, you can be very sure that it's been sustainably caught.
You broke up there just as you were quoting the number of salmon that they're expected. How many millions were they expecting to come back to spawn?
As of a couple of days ago, it was tracking to be 55 to 60 million salmon coming back to Bristol Bay to spawn, largely sockeye salmon. And it's just an incredible, this incredible run of this. The thing that's amazing about it too, when you think about it, is it's just priceless because the nutrients. We haven't really got into the whole omega-3 story yet, but the nutrients, the specific nutrition packages that those fish represent, it's literally some of the healthiest food on the planet, some of the most sustainable food on the planet. And one of the things that is going on up there now is there's a big mining consortium that is trying to build a massive open pit mine right at the headwaters of Bristol Bay. This is
Uh-uh.
this is called the Pebble Mine Project, and it's been up and down. Going the last U.S. administration, Obama administration, their EPA basically stopped it in its tracks with the help of a lot of different environmental organizations, a lot of fishermen fighting to stop it, and it looked like they had stopped it. Well, you can imagine with Scott Pruitt running the EPA, what's happened since then. The stocks of the mining companies has shot up, and it's getting scary again. And as long as all those billions of dollars of minerals are in that ground, it's going to always be a threat. And some of the leading defenders of that habitat, and for those, the most vocal advocates for those salmon are the fishermen. And so that's just one reason we say if you want to save wild salmon, you need to eat wild salmon, because you need to support a healthy fishing industry, because nobody really cares about those fish more than people who rely on them for their living.
Wow, that you really turned my opinion around.
Oh, good.
I was thinking that there's like, we have envisioned, I mean, especially those who are, environmental activists, we're envisioning like the evil fishermen who are like killing the dolphins and, catching all the, well, they've said, they catch in their nets a lot of species other than tuna, for example. I hear this more in the tuna fishing than in the salmon fishing, obviously. And that they're killing dolphins and that they're killing all these other wildlife, and that they're having no regard for the supply, and so that we're killing the oceans.
There are always going to be bad actors out there. And the best way to put them out of business is to educate consumers to look for and choose sustainably sourced alternatives. I mentioned earlier there are 30 different, it's probably more than that by now, but many different environmental organizations from Oceana and the Seafood Watch program. But they're really the gold standard and the most rigorous. We actually became a licensee with them right out of the gate. So we were one of their first licensees. It's called the Marine Stewardship Council. And you can find their website at msc.org. And what they do is they're very rigorous. They go in and they evaluate fisheries, and they really do a deep dive into, okay, how many, what's the status of the fish stocks, who relies on them, including, what other species, there's over 130 species that rely on wild salmon throughout the course of their lives, from the smallest bacteria all the way up to killer whales, and everything in between, including us. So they'll, take a look at, how many salmon can we afford to catch, and are they being well managed? They'll look at all these different factors, and if they conclude that the fishery is being sustainably managed, they will endorse it. They will license it, and and what that means is companies like mine can put an MSC sticker or logo on that package or that web page. And when we first started and we committed to that, it had almost no value to marketing value to us, because nobody knew about it. But we knew it was the right thing to do, and we knew if we wanted to be in business 20 years from now, we have to support organizations that are working to protect the resource. And
Absolutely. Because then we
And
all lose. We all
that's
lose
right.
if we don't protect the resource.
And there's, I mean, we came from the oceans. We've got people out searching the galaxy now for other planets, and the first thing they look for life is water. And it's a pretty general consensus among scientists that life began in the oceans, and so we're connected to it, and we have to protect it. And unfortunately, we're not doing a very good job of that. So there are a lot of problems, but and a lot of these marine environmental organizations are popping up. As far as the MSC goes, it's really they made a lot of progress. About, oh gosh, it's probably been 8 or 10 years ago. They actually had McDonald's weigh in and say, look, we're only going to buy MSC certified fish for our fish sandwiches. That may sound like, not that big a deal.
That's huge.
They sell over 100 million fish sandwiches a year. Now, I'd heard that was just in Europe, but whatever, it's a lot. And where that is coming from is Alaskan pollock and Alaskan cod, primarily the pollock. But that is one of the biggest fisheries in the world, and that's been managed according to the guidelines that I mentioned earlier. And so that's just one story. But what consumers can do, people can do if they want to preserve our oceans and preserve our fish, is look for fish that are certified sustainably. And again, you've got bad actors out there that will, especially as more and more people are looking for it, they'll put their maybe put that logo on there illegally. Or the other part of the MSC that I referred to them as a gold standard. What makes them the gold standard is not only they're rigorous in investigating, researching the fishery itself, but also the companies like mine that are selling it. So they'll come in once a year and they will audit all our books, and we have to have a chain of custody trail from the time that fish left the water.
Oh, wow.
You
So, because you could just
know,
say you're selling sustainable fish and then
that's
go
right.
buy it from someone
That's
else
right.
that's cheaper.
So everybody that handled that fish from the time it came off the boat, the processing plant, they have to document that this is comes from an MSC certified fishery. And when we submit our purchase order, that has to be documented. The license number on the document when it gets processed. Every step of the way, it has to be documented. So we have a solid paper trail showing that fish is indeed what we claim it is. There was just a big, at least in the seafood industry, big news. There's a company called Sea to Table, I think, something like that. And anyway, they just got busted back on the East Coast. Just got busted for claiming that that they were getting fish from one area, one boat. It turned out the boat had been decommissioned for like 3 years. So there's a lot of smoke and mirrors out there.
Mm.
And so really the takeaway is you just have to find somebody, a fishmonger, a fisherman, a fish vendor that you can trust, that isn't going to be leading you astray. And that goes for restaurants and grocery stores too.
Mm-hmm. You've mentioned this a fishery when talking about looking at the quality control. Can you just explain what is a fishery? Is it the boats that
Sure.
go out, or is it the company that collects the fish from the boats? What?
It's basically, so I was referring to the Bristol Bay sockeye salmon fishery. The fishery is basically a defined geographic region, a specific type of fish, specific type of gear or fishing method. And that's basically it. So you have a halibut fishery, you can have black cod fishery or cod, anything. It's just a term that basically describes the area, the type of fishing. That you have maybe a purse seine salmon fishery, and you have a gillnet salmon fishery, and troll. So that's is that clear? That it's
Mm-hmm.
basically those three things: the region, the fishing method, and the species.
So, and then it's all the different fishermen can be independent and they go and they fish a regional area called a fishery. with a specific method for a specific fish. And then is it the Alaskan government that pays for the scientists to oversee every fishery?
That's correct. That's
Got
correct.
it.
I'm not. I'm sure that's 100% true. I know that they will sometimes. Local areas will. Uh, they'll sort of take a tiny little percentage of that particular fishery, and they will have fishermen go out and catch those fish and sell them to raise money to help with maybe special projects that they're working on. In fact, we just this week are getting some salmon from Prince William Sound, Alaska. That run was not so big this year, and it shut down early, and so there wasn't a lot of those fish around. But our supplier called us and said that the Alaska Department of Fish and Game is having what they call a cost recovery fishery, basically what I just described, and they're going to let us catch a few more fish. And would you like to buy them? And we said sure. So, but I think the overwhelming part of their budget comes from the state budget.
Oh, and so there's no way to sort of blackmail or not blackmail, but bribe or manipulate the scientists to say, yeah, yeah, keep fishing, everything's good.
Well, that's at this day and age, nothing would surprise me, right? But the thing is that scientist is going to be out of job if those fish don't come back and the run fails, and
Right.
it's not just one person. You would have to. I mean, they're teams of people, and Bristol Bay is a big area, and there are 6 different river systems and numerous biologists, and and basically the success of the run is evidence that that's not happening, at least on a very big scale. I don't think it's happening at all. And these are people that, they're passionate about protecting this resource. And make no mistake, they also understand that they want to maximize the value of the resource and
Mm-hmm.
maximize the value of the fishery. That's part of their mandate. But part of that over the long term is, of course, making sure that fish come back every year. And so I know it, intimately from having been in the midst of it for so long, and I think you could feel pretty good about it.
The type of fishing that is used for salmon, do because I've heard that some types of fishing end up catching other fish and then they just die and so then they get thrown away.
That's a good question. You mentioned that it's called bycatch, and it's it's a big problem in some places. When I first started fishing, when I was 30 years ago, there was not all this focus on sustainability, and honestly, we would bring up our nets and we would have all kinds of things in there, and there wasn't any market for a lot of them, and so those would go back over the side. And but a lot has changed since then. Part of the problem, what happened in the one fishery in Alaska, where they weren't getting a lot of one kind of salmon back. Let's see, they were getting uh, basically what the part of that whole management process is to set up a limit, a bycatch limit. So if you're out on a boat and you're, say, catching pollock, and somehow a school of salmon goes through, and you catch a bunch of king salmon, well, that's all recorded, and you actually have to have those big fishing boats up there have to have observers on the boats. And so when they bring their nets in and they dump out the bag of fish, they actually count the bycatch. And what they do is basically have a bycatch allowance. And when you hit that allowance, you are done. You're not fishing anymore. And so that forces the skippers, the fishermen, to do everything they can to avoid bycatch. If there are particular areas where there tends to be bycatch, they will avoid those. And it's not a perfect system. It's not that you're not going to get some bycatch, but it's much less than it used to be, and it weighs into that whole sustainability evaluation.
Very cool. Very cool. When they are the bycatch alive? Like, can they throw them back and they still live, or are they dead?
It just depends on the type of gear, how long it's been in the water. Now, I'm not sure. One of the interesting things about it, if you could sell the bycatch, that would change the whole sort of equation. Now, if I can find a market for my bycatch, maybe I will. Maybe the salmon is so much more valuable than then whatever the pollock that I want to catch it. So you're not allowed to keep the bycatch. It has to go back over the side, whether it's living or dead. Now that may have
Oh.
changed because it just doesn't seem right, does it? That we couldn't find a home for that, whether it's donated or, and so I want to just caution that I haven't looked into that recently. I haven't been a fisherman myself for a few years, so I'm not sure what the current status is. But generally, that's been the rule of thumb that all bycatch has to go back over the side because if there was a market for it, that would change the
And
dynamics.
that would be a way of sort of manipulating the system. Like you want to catch salmon, but so you get a license for pollock and then you go and you catch salmon anyway if you're allowed to keep it. So it sounds like they're trying to keep them honest.
It is it's a cat and mouse game, but everybody wants to preserve the fisheries. And you have the one rogue fisherman that may sneak out and catch fish he's not supposed to catch, but there are huge penalties. People will lose their boats for that.
Wow.
People will I witnessed in fact I drifted over the line a couple times myself in my career, and there are big fines. You catch fish you're not supposed to be catching. It's thousands and thousands of dollars out of your pocket. If you do it more than once, you can be, lose your license altogether. So it's kind of like speeding. People try to get away with it, and eventually they're going to get caught, and it hurts. And that is a component of the management of the fishery. You have to have strong enforcement.
Now, thank you for taking the time to paint this picture so we really understand the difference in terms of what it takes to raise, farm raised fish versus wild caught. And that kind of looking at it from my standpoint, it seems that I know every farm is different. Maybe there's some farms that are better, but it looks right now that wild caught is better for the environment and better for, well, obviously we're gonna get into the omegas, the discussion, but it's better for our health, but better for the environment, especially because of what all the feeding the fish the synthetic things, feeding them antibiotics, feeding them stuff that they're not supposed to be fed, feeding them concentrated fish pellets that have concentrated mercury. That seems just crazy, just totally crazy. Why on earth would we want to eat these farmed fish, and let alone support it if it's hurting the environment? And now it's hurting. Now we find out from you that it's hurting the
The
wild
wild salmon.
fish. I mean, that's just ridiculous. It's just a lose-lose situation. So here we have this beautiful system in Alaska that you're saying is we're really make sure that we're paying attention to maintaining a sustainable and healthy system. Let's talk about the nutrients in salmon and these wild caught fish in Alaska, and why are they so healthy?
Well, wild salmon and seafood in general is one of the last truly wild, sort of naturally organic foods that we have on the planet. These fish have been swimming out in this ocean, the soup of micronutrients, and eating on the sort of the natural diet for their entire lives, and consequently, they're just about the most nutrient dense food you can find. They've got just way more than the RDI of many of our essential amino acids, the healthy fats. We all need omega 3s and omega 6s in our diet, but the omega 3s have essentially been deleted from the Western diet and replaced by omega 6s to a large extent. I think throughout evolution, the evidence is that our sort of the ratio of these two fats that drive all kinds of systems in our body, right? They're parts of every cell and every kind of tissue. They're or should be. Uh, they are the precursors to all these different kinds of hormones that allow our cells to communicate with one another. And so when you don't get them, or you get an imbalance of these two types, they're very different. The omega 3s are very different than the omega 6s. They're both important, but when you get radically out of balance from our evolutionary norm, it causes a lot of problems. And so there's a lot of evidence that a huge number of chronic disease is related to the imbalance of these types of fats in our diet. And as you know, and most people listening know, for the last 30, 40 years, we've just branded all fat as bad. Fortunately, that's starting to change, and people are realizing that that's crazy. Our brains are made of fat, every cell, and our body has a lipid membrane, and we just need these fats. So back to these wild salmon and other fatty fish, they're just the best sources on the planet of these types of essential fats. And it's not only the fats, it's the iodine and the selenium, the minerals and different vitamins, a lot of the B vitamins. It's just a total nutrient package in fish that you don't find in terrestrial foods. We don't hear much about iodine in North America because we iodize our salt. But if you look around the world, and when you get away from shoreline populations, people that are eating seafood, iodine deficiency is huge and with horrible consequences, mental retardation, and even in the UK, they don't iodize their salt, and so you have a lot of people with iodine deficiency. So those are just some of the this book you referred to earlier that I'm coming out with. I'm calling it the seafood prescription, because the nutrients in seafood, and particularly wild salmon, are just they just address so many needs that we have on a biochemical level.
I was actually just talking to a woman who I'm going to have on the show in a few months, and we had a whole discussion about iodine and why there's an epidemic right now of thyroid conditions.
Yes.
And back 50 years ago, 70 years ago, they used to, if you these old medical texts, they used to give iodine to people who had hypo or hyperthyroid or Hashimoto's, and all of them were given iodine. And iodine was used very, very commonly used as any, if you get a cut or a scrape, your mom would just rub iodine on you. It was much
Hmm.
more. It was utilized much more. And then you could see the like you said, the coastal population didn't have deficiency, but as you came inland, they did, and that's why they started using they started putting iodine in salt. But people are now going away from table salt and going to salt that isn't supplemented with iodine, because they're using Celtic salt, which they don't add. There's no iodine added to that. And the first thing we see is in children who have iodine deficiency is a 15-point loss in IQ.
Yep. Yep.
15 points. That is a huge difference. And I've looked into this iodine issue and just seen more and more evidence that more of the population is iodine deficient than they realize. And you're right, we are not eating a lot of the foods that are rich in iodine as certain populations are, and we can definitely see a difference in IQ and in thyroid condition, or in the thyroid health. But also, I what I was told is that iodine is actually used um, in the mitochondria. So it's part of the powerhouse, part of the nutrients that are needed to create energy. So we're seeing that there's a lot of issues that happen, sort of like this domino effect, when we're iodine deficient. That's just one nutrient. And then now we've got this omega. You're talking about the omega 3/6 ratio. Most people that eat animals like beef, for example, that are raised, this in the standard way. So now we've got grains being fed to cows, like corn is being grown to fit. Cows never used to walk around eating, fields of corn, right? Cows want to eat grass, but we're not letting them eat what they want to eat. It's kind of like if you took your cat, instead of giving it cat food, you gave it dandelions, and that's the only food you ever let your cat eat, was dandelions, right? I mean, it's just ridiculous. It makes the cow sick, but it makes them get really fat really fast so they can make money. So they're making the cow suffer. They're making a not a nutrient full steak, because when you feed grains to a cow, they're filled with omega 6s, and they have very minimal omega 3s, right? And now isn't that also what we're seeing with these farmed fish, now that they're being subsidized with grains? They don't have a rich omega 3 profile.
That's right. That's right. It's One other bit of hopeful news is the story is gradually getting out. And so some of the food companies are actually switching to what they refer to as high oleic oils, corn oil, soybean oil, where they've hybridized. I don't know if I guess you'd call it, genetic modification. But basically they're replacing some of the omega-6s with omega-9s, which is monounsaturated fat like you get in olive oil. And so this is because of consumer demand. And so it's why it's so important for you and I and everybody like us to get out there and try to get this message to as many people as possible. When you demand grass-fed beef, more of it will become available, and eventually, hopefully, the price will come down. And I think that those trends are all positive. Somebody was telling me just recently that peanut M&Ms are now manufactured with high oleic soybean oil, so that fewer omega-6s, and hopefully that will start having an impact as that trend continues.
Very interesting. So, is there like an amount of omega 3? Could you say, like, if you ate an 8 ounce fillet of salmon, that you would get 1 gram of omega? Or can you sort of tell us how many grams we could get, or how much fish we have to eat to get a gram of omega 3?
Yeah, it varies by species of wild salmon, and generally the fattier the fish, the more omega-3s it has. So Alaskan king salmon or British Columbia king salmon, for that matter, wild salmon, are going to have the most. And that could be, say, as much as 2 grams of omega-3s in a 6-ounce portion.
Holy crow.
And I think sockeye is typically 1.2 grams. Actually, it'd be more than that. And then we have some albacore tuna that can have up to 7 grams in a 3.5-ounce portion. And so my message to people is don't worry too much about the actual number. Just eat fish. It's not only the omega-3s; those are critically important, but there's a lot of other good stuff in there too. And if you want fish that are super high in omega-3s, generally look for the fattier fish. So like the tuna and the king salmon, the sockeye salmon, the amounts can change. We've seen dramatic swings in a particular species just based on ocean conditions, because ultimately it depends on what they're eating out there, and the ocean can be a bit of a black box. But generally, the fattier the fish, the higher the omega-3 levels.
Can you tell us some things that really surprised you when you started diving into studying omega 3s? What were some things that surprised you about omega 3, or got you really excited about learning more about omega 3?
Well, there's something that immediately comes to mind, and it drives my passion today. And that is when I learned it's not only about getting the omega-3s, it's also about restricting the omega-6s. My wife, we've been together 35 years, and when we first met, and for the first 2 years we were together, she battled chronic allergies.
Mm.
She had skin issues. She had an inflammatory eye condition that every time she was stressed out, it would flare up, and the doctor would put her on steroids. And this went on. And when we started the company and I started going to these conferences and learning, I met one fellow in particular, Dr. William Lands, who is a real pioneer in this field, discovered a lot of this biochemistry. And when by the way, I'll just mention his website is EFA, stands for essential fatty acid, EFA education.org, EFAeducation.org. And you can learn all kinds of stuff right from the horse's mouth there. But anyway, back to my story. So when we learned about this, because we were eating fish and generally healthy, but these are problems that had persisted in my wife. And so we learned about the omega-6 factor and how prevalent it is and all the different foods it is. And we just started culling those out of our diet. One by one, all those things cleared up. And to this day, she hasn't. Her allergies are essentially gone. She would be put in. She would have to go to bed for days during pollen season, and she never does that anymore. And this keratosis pilaris, sometimes known as chicken skin, often people get it on their upper arms. The doctor had told her it was genetic, and there was nothing they could do about it. That cleared up. It's never been back. Personally, I have eczema and psoriasis in my family, both inflammatory lengths. And I used to have this big green jar of, I think it was hydrocortisone cream that the doctor would give me when I would break out in these eczema rashes. And when we adopted this balanced omega diet, that cleared away, and I've never had another incident. And my other people in my family have had psoriasis, and that has all but disappeared. And so, back to your question, what has really surprised me, what motivates me, it's if just within my own family, I've seen those just dramatic transformations from doing this one simple change, for balancing these omega-3s and 6. Just imagine how many millions of people out there could benefit from that. But there's just so much noise, and there's so many potential things you've got to compete with to try to get your message out. So I hope this will help some of the people listening, and they can share it. And so, since then, there have just been so many different studies that have come out sort of validating that. Skin issues are one of the very first signs of an omega-3 deficiency. Dry hair, dry eye, dry skin. And so we've seen this firsthand. This is not hoodoo or, it's not a magic bullet, but it's made a dramatic difference in my life and the lives of people around me, and a lot of our customers too.
So to increase omega-3s, we can get it from our food by eating wild caught fish, especially the fatty fishes. We can, of course, if we can't find wild caught locally, we can definitely check out your website, vitalchoice.com, and try one of your Vital boxes, which look delicious. Which one would have the most fat? Because you've got 3 choices: the wild salmon box, wild fish box, and wild seafood box.
They're all good. Back to my point. I mean, they all have lots of omega. There's more product in the larger boxes, so they're going to have more. Shellfish generally, doesn't have as much fat. It's more lean, and the white fish is generally more lean. So halibut and cod are going to have quite a bit less fat, these kinds of fats, than the salmon. So if you really wanted to, get a big dose of omega-3s, it would be the wild salmon. But one other thing we haven't really discussed, and that is, and it's important, and that is sort of the fresh versus frozen, and the frozen versus canned question.
Good. I like this. Yes, I like it when guests come up with their own questions. Makes my job easier. Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, what's the difference? Why can't I just go get everything canned?
Well, you can. So first of all, most people will tell you, and most restaurants and grocery stores will tell you or imply that fresh is superior. When it comes to fish, fresh is superior to frozen. And if you get it right off the boat, if you catch it yourself, that can be true. I probably have eaten more fish right out of the wild salmon right out of the water than anybody, and I have a hard time telling a fresh caught fish versus one that's been frozen and stored properly. But anyway, so there was a study done here a year or so ago where they actually have a tool now where you can actually measure the cellular damage that happens from freezing and from quality degradation. And basically they had a pool of people, and they asked them, what do you prefer, fresh or frozen? And about 80% of them said they wanted fresh fish and would never buy frozen, or seldom buy frozen. And then they cooked them side by side, and they asked them which they preferred, and it was just flipped. 80% of them said they thought that the previously frozen fish tasted better than the fresh. There's a pretty well-known food writer at the New York Times, Jane, her name escapes me right now, but anyway, she has made this statement that the freshest tasting fish is that which is frozen right out after harvest and stays that way until you thaw it out at home. And when you think about it, freezing is really like nature's preservative. And so, if as long as you freeze that fish and you protect those unstable oils from air, you protect them from oxidation, that fish is going to taste just like it came out of the water when you thaw it out a couple of years later, not a couple months later, whatever it is. Just interjecting an example of that. Recently, we found a box of fish that had gotten lost in our big freezer that was 2 years old. It was king salmon from Copper River that we'd put away for a customer who we lost track of her. Anyway, I took some home thinking it was probably going to be freezer burned and not taste very good. And I thawed it out, took it out of the package, cooked it up. It was absolutely phenomenal. It tasted like it had been caught a month ago. So just that's just to make the point that there are a lot of advantages to frozen fish if it's frozen properly, and that means getting every bit of air out of the package. That means maintaining a low temperature, stable low temperature. A lot of people will put fish in their home freezers, which are frost free. And the way that they remain frost free is they go through a thawing cycle. They come up above freezing and then they go back down. And if you have one of these, you've seen how your ice cubes evaporate and your ice cream goes bad, and it's not very good for fish either. So we recommend that people get a good chest freezer or something if they want to freeze a lot of fish and hold it for an extended period of time. Now on to canned salmon or canned fish, sardines, tuna, and mackerel, salmon are the main canned products that we sell. There are a lot of bad canned sardines and a bad salmon out there. Some buyers, processors will tend to put the lower quality fish into the can because you can hide imperfections, and the best fish will go right into the fresh market. And so what we do, knowing the industry and the smoke and mirrors, and I mean, I could talk for an hour just about this one topic, but basically what we do is we go to companies that we know put the best fish in the can, and they don't use the smoke and mirrors. They don't freeze the fish and ship it to Thailand to thaw it out and have it canned, and all this stuff that goes on to try to get the price as low as possible. The supermarket environment is so competitive, and you can go to the store and you'll see maybe California sardines, product of Vietnam. What's going on there? Or you can even see wild Alaskan salmon, product of China. Well, those fish are being frozen at the point of harvest, whether it's California or Alaska. And because labor is so much cheaper, they're sent over to China or Vietnam, someplace in Asia, and they're processed. And the value adding is done. They're put in a can or frozen and put in packaging and then shipped back. And that's a lot cheaper than having the product processed domestically. So that's another thing that we do. We only buy domestically processed seafood, either Alaska or here in Washington, and that costs more. But we're supporting those jobs, and we don't have as many food miles on our either.
Right. I hate it when it's like I see grapes in January and they came from halfway around the world. And it's like, really, do I want to put my money? Do I want to, they say vote with your fork. Put your money towards local, sustainable, towards the industries and the people you want to support, towards the farmers you want to support, and the industries that you want to see survive. And don't put your money towards the companies and the industries that you don't want to see here anymore in a few generations.
That's right.
Just looking at Toys R Us, how it's gone out of business. The entire millennial population did not want to see Toys R Us here in 100 years for their grandchildren. And we can the millennials could put McDonald's out of business if they stopped going there, right? And so we definitely want to, for the listeners, especially the millennials, if you want to see sustainable fishing, we need to support the companies that will continue to do what you do, what Vital Choice does. I'm definitely going to buy a wild fish box. I'm just like drooling, especially because I want my son to eat, healthy protein and get the omegas. Now, what about, this might not be a savory topic to discuss, but what about parasites? People say
Well,
that's
that's a great question. That's just one more huge reason to source frozen fish, because once you freeze those, they're just basically sort of another type of protein that's in your fish. I mean, they're not in all fish, of course, but they're harmless once they die. Once you, and a lot of people don't realize it, but when you go into a sushi bar, pretty much every raw fish that you eat has been frozen for that reason. In fact, I believe it's actually law that it has to be, or at least fish that are vulnerable to that, prone to having parasites. Um, that's part of consuming a wild food. They've been around a lot longer than we have, and they're going to be there on occasion. We do put a lot of effort into high grading our product, inspecting it, hand inspecting it, and trying to catch as many of those as possible. But honestly, I don't really even worry about it when it comes to fish that's been frozen, because they kind of disappear. Now, if a friend brings me I kind of prefer my salmon cooked kind of medium rare, but if it's fresh and it's never been frozen, I will cook it more thoroughly. We'll either freeze it first or cook it more thoroughly.
Got it.
It's very rare for that to cause problems, and to my knowledge. I mean, we've been doing this for a long time and sold millions of pieces of fish, and we get asked about it every now and then. And I like to tell this story. I was at a organic restaurant in New York with my wife and daughter one time, and I ordered this big, beautiful organic green salad, and my server set it down. And I looked down, I'm just about to take a bite, and here's this big green inchworm cruising across my red pepper.
That's how you know it's good. If your salad could sustain the inchworm, then it's when the bugs are dead. It's when your
That's
salad
right.
killed the bug. You don't want to eat
Oh,
that salad,
I
right?
got all indignant, and I waved the waiter over, and he said, "Oh, I'm sorry, sir. We triple wash our salad, but it's proof positive. We don't use pesticides." And
Right.
he did a flip. He turned it into like a badge of honor.
Look, if it
So
could, right?
you might not find parasites in your farm salmon. But why is that? You might not find parasites in your conventionally raised crops, veggies, but what is
That's
the price of that?
that's funny. That's funny. What did you do with the inchworm?
Oh, he swept the salad away and came back.
Oh, okay. You gave it a good home.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah.
No, it's interesting how just a comment can really shift your perspective, and so that I apply that sort of line of thinking to the parasite issue when it comes to.
Very cool. And I see that not only do you have filet, but you also have salmon burgers and salmon dogs and salmon sausages.
We've had a lot of time to get creative, and we've found partners who it's very difficult because we have high standards. We only want to use wild fish, and we only want to use particular types of wild fish, and we don't sell a lot of that. I mean, people that buy it generally love it, and the burgers we sell quite a bit of, but compared to Costco or major grocery store chains, we don't use a lot of volume. And so most manufacturers just don't want to mess around with little sort of custom orders for those types of things. So, but we have developed partnerships and created those products. And one of my favorite ones and favorite stories is we have a wild salmon sausage. I was up in Alaska with Dr. Andrew Weil one time.
Oh, wow. I love
And
him.
yeah, he's a great guy. I've taken him up there a couple times, and we've sponsored, I think, the last 15 of his nutrition and health conferences that he puts on every year. But so I've got to know him very well. But anyway, we were up in Alaska. We were on a boat, and he was saying, "We've got to figure out how to get these omega-3s into the breakfast meal, for kids."
Right.
And he had just written a cookbook with Rosie Daly. Was that her name? She was Oprah's chef for a while. They came out with a cookbook together, and so he was kind of had cooking on his mind and healthy cooking. And he said, when we get home, send me some frozen salmon, and I'll mess around and see what we can come up with. Well, sometime later, we got home. I sent him the fish. A few days later, he called me up, and he was really excited. He said, "Randy, I think these are going to be fantastic." He said, "I'm going to send you the recipes, make them, and see what you think." And so I was really busy. We didn't have a lot of help at that time. I just didn't get around to it right away. I had to go out and buy all the ingredients and then come home and mix it up and cook it. I just had put it off. And he called me 2 or 3 times. Did you try them? Did you try them? And so one night I just vowed I'm not going to bed tonight until I try these. So I went out, I got all the ingredients, made the 3 different recipes for the salmon sausage that he had come up with, and cooked them. And my wife had gone to bed, and they were so fantastic I couldn't believe it. I went running into the bedroom. Carla, get up, you've got to try these. And and sort of, okay, now how do we get them from my kitchen into commercial volumes, And it took us probably a couple of years to figure out, to find somebody that would do that. But anyway, I think it's probably been close to 10 years now. We launched those Dr. Weil wild salmon sausages. There's 3 different flavors, and percentage of the sales of those goes to his School of Integrative Medicine at the University of Arizona. And so it's a great story. There's a gram of omega-3s in each one, and they're
Oh
one of
my
my
gosh.
favorite products.
Oh, I can't wait to get my son to try them. That is so cool because I mean, I've been looking, he loves sausage, and I really don't want to feed him pork sausage, but he just loves sausages. So this is going to be great.
It's just pure wild salmon and organic herbs and spices, which is what's so cool about it.
Very
And
cool.
we've sort of tweaked the recipe over the years, and I think they're really good. They're really good. There's a spicy one and a real herby one, and I think the savory one might be the best one to try for your son. But if you like spicy, you could buy the sample box and try all 3.
Very cool. Now, on the menu on your website, vitalchoice.com, I see it says shop all products. So when I mouse over that and I look at the bottom, because it gives me a lot of choices, it says samplers and gift packs. And under that, one of the choices is healthy mom and baby. Now, I mean, I was
Yes.
pregnant about, a few years ago, so it's still fresh in my mind, that, everyone told me not to eat fish when I was pregnant. And now we're hearing that no, it's actually really good. You need these omegas. It actually makes a healthier pregnancy. And this page has lots of information, including a documentary on fish and mercury and nutrition. It's a public TV documentary, so people can watch it there. Tell us a bit about that. So
I'd
let's
love to. Thank you for
yeah.
asking about that, because that's another thing that I'm really passionate about. And just FYI, to maybe give you an idea of how important that is to us. We had a big consumer product good company come to us. We didn't know who it was for a while, that tried to buy that URL from us, healthymom.com. And they started out at $5,000, and they got up to $100,000, and we just said nope, because we really the name Vital Choice came from a passage in a book about what a vital choice it is for moms to get these omega-3s into their diet for the developing brain of the fetus. And now we've learned it's not only the brain, it's important to have them in the mom's diet before conception. The
Mhm.
analogy that a scientist who specialized, he founded the Mother and Child Foundation in the UK. I got to know him very well. And the analogy he uses is, when you're going to plant a garden, you put the fertilizer in the soil before you plant the seeds.
Mhm.
And it's the same thing. And it's not only the mom, it's the dad. So anyway, it's just sort of an area of special importance to me personally, and to our company, that really there is no food on the planet healthier for a young couple that's trying to conceive than wild salmon.
It's so true. You're right. They are seeing that now. Up to a year before conception, both the male and the female, their health, and their food choices matter. That couples that eat a diet high in omega-3s and organic vegetables, so they're
Yeah, I think a lot of the fertility problems that we're seeing are related to a deficiency of these, not only the fats, but the micronutrients in seafood. I
hmm
had a friend in, where was he? Somewhere back east, but he wrote a book on fertility, and he said he personally and his wife had fertility problems until he started eating sardines, and that solved the problem. Not that's going to fix it for everybody, but there's evidence that well, the DHA, it's one of the primary omega-3 fatty acids, is a precursor of the enzyme that is in the sperm cell that allows it to penetrate the egg. And I mean, it's
Oh.
just one little sort of bit of trivia that I found really fascinating. And so if you're not getting any DHA in your diet, your chances are you're going to have a hard time conceiving. And the other thing that was interesting was part of the reason it's important to get a healthy diet before conception is once that egg is fertilized and that those cells start dividing and that embryo starts growing, one of the first things that happens is the heart. One of the first things organ to develop is the heart, because that circulates the blood and nourishes every other cell. And if you're deficient in important nutrients, your heart is going to reflect that. The fetal heart is going to reflect that. And that blood flow is critical to the developing brain. And so if you've got suboptimal blood flow to the brain, you're going to have suboptimal brain development and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. And you already at the beginning of this interview cited that study where they found that the minimal amount of mercury that's in fish, it's worse to avoid eating fish uh, because of the fear of mercury.
They concluded that those people that told you not to eat fish during pregnancy, and that includes a lot of doctors, well-meaning doctors that just didn't have the very good information, that information advising women to avoid eating seafood actually risks causing the harm that they're intending to prevent. So causing the neurological deficits and problems that they expect to, or are thinking that they're going to avoid by avoiding the mercury. And what Dr. Hiblin found was that, yeah, methyl mercury in seafood may cost the infant 1/10 of one IQ point, but the omega-3s will give you 5 IQ points on average. So the trade-off is pretty profound. And that study that I mentioned was 14,000 some mother-child pairs in the UK. It was called ALSPAC, ALSPAC. It's probably on that page there that you're looking at. I think it is. The other one, and these are two of the most, the largest, most robust studies, been going on for years and years, funded not by industry, but by universities and NIH. The other one was in the Seychelles Islands. The Seychelles Islands was chosen because of these people eat 10 to 12 fish meals per week, which is way more than pretty much any American, I think, most Americans. And so again, and all ocean fish has trace levels of mercury. And so certainly they did find mercury in the moms and in the hair, some more than others. So they tracked all that, and then the women got pregnant, and they've been following those kids now. They're adults. They're, I think, 25, 30 years old now. And they could find no evidence of negative impact from the methyl mercury. In fact, in the ALSPEC study, the women that had the highest mercury levels, and I know this is counterintuitive, but the women that had the highest mercury levels had the kids with the best cognitive, health endpoints, the least emotional problems, the least developmental problems. And that was basically matched what they found in the Seychelles. But that doesn't really make very good headlines or headlines that people remember. So the headlines that people remember are the ones that fear-mongering the media uses to sell papers or well, you know what I mean.
Absolutely.
Kind of back to where we started, you just got to be careful about and recognize that the headlines that you see in your email box every morning are not necessarily representative of what's really going on out there in the world. Not a balanced view.
Fake news.
That seems to be the term of the day, yes.
Right? I'm going to share this with my parent-in-laws. They because they love fish, and they taught their African gray parrot to say, because he says like 5,000 things, it's hilarious, but they recently taught him to say fake news. So out of nowhere he goes, fake news.
If I could just share one question, this is just so important. And one story I wanted to tell is I have a friend who is a very well-known vegan. And I had some time. We went on a trip together, a camping trip, where we showed up at the same place and had a conversation with him. And he's a leader in that community. But he one day pulled me aside and he wanted to talk to me, and he said, I begged somebody close to me to eat seafood when she was pregnant, just eat salmon while she's pregnant. And this person was shocked that I was recommending that she depart from the sort of vegan diet. And he said, no, this is really important. And so I thought that was interesting. But in public, and I'm not going to out him, but
Right.
there's some hypocrisy there, that he's in public telling people to avoid it. Now he isn't so much. He isn't so much as some of the other ones out there. I mean, there are. You must be familiar with that "What the Health" movie.
Yes.
That just what a travesty that thing was. But talking about what those are the headlines, or the sound bites that people hear. That fish is the most toxic food on the planet, and yeah, if you're eating marine mammals, it's pretty toxic. But that's not what we're buying in our stores, and that's certainly not what we're selling.
We need to give up all diet dogma. I mean, and listen to our body, look at the look at the labs, like go to a good doctor, look at the labs, feel how you're feeling, make sure that you're symptom free. We can't just, say, well, I'm this one way. Like, I really believe in the plant-based diet. I believe that eating more vegetables, that eating less meats. And before we end, I wanted
Hmm.
to discuss that you'd said not only increasing omega-3s was what helped you and your wife and your whole family gain better health, but that decreasing omega-6. And I believe that when people go more plant-based, they focus less on eating less meat and eating more vegetables, they see better health. And you've got, of course, got to listen to your body. But that if someone holds on to veganism, for example, for years and years and years. I just interviewed a doctor yesterday that says that most of his patients that are vegan once he looks at the labs, are unhealthy. Now, that isn't to say that vegans can't be healthy, and many are, but that it's easy when you stick to one diet for many years and you don't seek balance.
I
That
suspect, yeah, totally hear you. I agree with you. We are omnivores, right?
Right. Well, it's about discovering what's good for us right now. And like you said, when when a mother is about to conceive, her body's going to go through a totally different change and have different needs, and we should recognize that we need to shift the diet for the needs of right now. If someone has a disease, they can shift their diet to help heal the disease. If someone's about to have a lifestyle change, like going from a child into teen years, there's different nutrient needs than someone going from their 50s to their 60s or 60s to 70s. So just being open to shifting our diet, and right now incorporating more omega-3s and decreasing omega-6s to improve better health. Could you tell us, what did you and your family do to decrease omega-6s?
Excellent question. And that basically is a matter of identifying which foods have, where are we getting all the omega 6s? And I personally believe that, the omega 6s in an avocado are just fine. It's when you're using basically seed oils, corn oil, soybean oil, safflower oil, all these subsidized oils that are in essentially every processed food, or most of them, that for instance, what is it? Corn oil, I believe, has 60 omega 6s for every omega 3, 60 to 1.
Mm,
And so when you're, putting corn oil on your salad, and it's confusing, because to this day, there are people out there, this is just a whole nother subject, but there are still people out there telling, high profile people that are telling consumers to ignore this whole thing about omega 6 omega 3 ratio. Ignore it. It doesn't, go ahead and eat. There's a fellow named Walter Willett at Harvard, and I just scratch my head when I hear him, because in spite of all the evidence, there's just more and more studies all the time. He continues to tell people, eat vegetable oil every day. And well, I went to one of their conferences here a few years ago, and guess who the platinum sponsor was at their conference? It
oh
was
my gosh.
Monsanto. It was
No.
Monsanto. Yes. And I was at Andy Weil's conference here a couple months ago, and he spoke, and his same thing. Ignore the ratio. Well, just common sense tells you if throughout evolution our omega-3 omega-6 ratio was even, roughly 1 to 1, maybe a few more omega-6s, getting 30 or 40 times more of one now, is that not a problem? Not something you should worry about? These are incredibly bioactive compounds. The EPA and the DHA are just the most bioactive molecules in our diet or potential diet, and they have powerful influences on the processes in our bodies. And so, I don't know, a couple of things there. There's a lot of confusion, and of course, there's billions and billions of dollars invested in the seed oil crops and all the meat, the meat industry that relies on them. So our beef and pork and chicken is all full of these omega-6s. And so back to your original question. Sorry, I got off track there a little bit, but basically, if you're eating wholesome foods and grass-fed beef and basically trying to eat a natural, as close to nature as possible, you'll dramatically reduce the omega-6s in your diet.
Mm-hmm.
And we actually developed a test at the recommendation of this Dr. Lanz, who I referred to earlier. So it's a finger stick blood test where you can actually find out what what your ratio is, the tissue levels in your own body are, and you can monitor them as you change. But the whole idea is you don't really have to test. Sometimes it helps to measure, but basically, if Ashley, we have a 15-minute video that we created a few years ago, and it's had quite a few views online. And I believe if you go to vitaltest.com, that's a page on our website, vitaltest.com, and it's called Out of Balance. And it's there somewhere. But anyway, I highly recommend your listeners check that out.
We'll make sure the link to that site, to that particular video called Out of Balance, is going to be in the show notes of the podcast, so listeners can go watch the video.
Great, because that really spells it out. It shows you the foods that have the most omega-3s and the most omega-6s. I interview 5 different, very well-known authorities on this, and they basically explain it better than I can. And I'm really passionate about getting that in front of as many people as possible. I really think this can solve so many health problems along with other things.
I have seen like when people decrease omega-6 and they increase omega-3, I have seen one woman, I saw her, she had asthma, adult asthma, and was so upset because they had her on 3 medications and the asthma was getting worse and worse, and she was gaining weight because they put her on steroids, and she was just really upset. And this was a woman I worked with a few years ago, and one of the things that I learned from naturopaths is get them on really high, healthy levels of omegas. Obviously, clean up the diet, so removing processed foods, getting back to more natural whole foods. And so lots of vegetables and good amounts of fruit, and eating clean protein, so grass-fed, pasture-raised proteins or wild-caught. And in 1 month, she called me back. And she had also supplemented with an omega-3 supplement, but she had decreased all the omega-6s. And she called me back and said, not only am I off the steroids, that was her biggest concern because it was causing her to gain weight, but she said, my doctor took me off of all 3 medications. I no longer have asthma. And she stayed in touch with me for about a year after, and she maintained no asthma symptoms. And she was so excited that she ended up, getting her sister and her niece and nephew, and getting, it sort of spread through her whole family. It's cool when one family member gets their health back. The rest of the family kind of goes, wait a second, what are you doing? And is that your experience with Vital Choice, that you see that one family member starts buying your products, and all of a sudden the rest of their family kind of comes in and starts buying the seafood boxes because they're noticing health differences?
Not only family members, but friends and neighbors, and nowadays everybody's so connected that it's wonderful. There's nothing better than helping somebody recover from a persistent problem, health problem. So
Very
that's why we
cool.
named the company Vital Choice a long time ago. It really is a vital. Again, it's not a magic bullet, but it's just a fundamental, such a fundamental aspect of every cell in our body needs to have adequate essential fatty acids to be healthy. I remember when I first learned this, I was at a party in our neighborhood, and we lived near a university, and there was a genetics professor that had just moved into the neighborhood, and we were talking, and I was still fishing at that time, and I told him I was a salmon fisherman, and he just lit up, and he goes, "Oh, I eat salmon every day. I used to have diabetes. I used to be overweight. He gave me this long list of health problems that he used to have, and then he started eating fish every day or frequently, and he said it just has made such a difference. And then he went on to explain that it's because every cell in our body, every brain cell, bone cell, muscle, you name it, every cell requires these, and we've basically taken them out of the Western diet. And so when you're deficient, that deficiency can manifest itself in just so many different ways, so many different diseases. In the process of researching my book, I've just been keeping a list of all the different chronic diseases that have been linked in some of these 30,000 studies to a deficiency or an imbalance of these omega-3s and omega-6s. And I'm over 100 now. So
Mm.
it just, it's not that they're going to cure everybody, but there is evidence that, and I thought that sort of anecdote from that professor really made sense. If it's something that every cell needs, and you're depriving every cell, then the cells aren't talking to each other the way they should be. They're
Mm-hmm.
not getting nutrition the way they need it. They're not excreting waste the way they need it. And so you could just that's why so many people, by the time they have lived a life on the standard American diet, they're on dozens of pharmaceuticals.
Mm-hmm. It's very exciting. And the big thing I know about omega-3 and or the essential fatty acids is our body to make stress hormones and sex hormones, it needs healthy fats. And if we don't have enough healthy fats, then our body won't have healthy amounts of estrogen or testosterone or progesterone or cortisol or and then, of course, as you already mentioned, every single cell wall in the body, the 37 trillion or 37.2 trillion cells roughly that each person has, every cell wall is made of fat. The myelin sheath on all the nerves are made of fat. 70% of the weight of the white matter of the brain is made of fat. And then, of course, all those enzymatic processes utilize
Yes.
it. Um, and
And
just
all the little organelles within the cells,
right.
their membranes are made of
Right,
it.
right. And I love that you said one of the first signs of a deficiency of fat can show up in the skin. The skin is this wonderful mirror of internal health. And so just things like rashes and dry skin patches. Like when I increased my omega-3s, the dry skin on my feet started to get better. The calluses started to go away. I thought that was really interesting. But it's a mirror of internal health. So if we have dry skin or premature aging skin or even the inflammatory skin issues that you mentioned, that's just a mirror that there's stuff like that is that we could have heart disease, that we could have, that it could be
Exactly.
a,
That's right.
right. It's a red flag that, because if the heart doesn't have healthy fats, I mean, it's something that's under high pressure. That's one of the things to go, first when we have a nutrient deficiency, because our body has to constantly repair to keep the heart healthy. And also if we don't have enough omega-3s, our blood doesn't clot properly. We have it clots too much.
That's right. Yeah, that the first discovery about the role of omega-3s in the diet happened in a study of Greenland Eskimos back in the 70s. And these two Danish scientists went over, and they're trying to figure out, these guys are eating like just the highest fat diet we've ever seen and all the marine mammals and whatnot, yet there's no heart disease. And that was
Mm-hmm.
at a time when we were saying, we believed that heart disease was driven by fat. And anyway, they eventually discovered that they had massive amounts of these omega-3s in their systems. And
Mm-hmm.
so their problem was, they had very thin blood.
Which is good,
Yes,
because
relatively good.
then you're not going to have a heart attack or a stroke, or your body won't create
Hmm.
clots. I knew a man once. He's a paramedic, and he had blood clots in his legs so bad he was on um Coumadin and warfarin. Not Coumadin. What's the one that starts with a C? Warfarin, and the other one that
I think it is Coumadin, isn't it?
is it called Coumadin?
I
It,
believe
it
it is.
must
Yeah.
be. And the two blood thinners, and he still had about 15 clots in his legs. And he saw a naturopath. The naturopath said, "Okay, well, we're gonna get you on omega 3, and we're gonna clean up your diet." And the MDs just kept giving him drugs, and it wasn't, he was on death's door because one of those clots moves, it starts
Yeah.
traveling, and he would have been dead, and he couldn't work anymore. I mean, it was his life was basically about to be over. And luckily, I mean, just, as fate would have it, he finds natural medicine, gets on, increases his omega 3s in his diet significantly, and all the clots go away. He gets off of all the drugs, and I've known him for about 8 years now, and he is the epitome of health. And he would have died within months because the clots just were getting worse and worse, and the drugs, are poison in and of themselves. They're basically rat poison. Um, and
And
it's just
they have side effects, and then
right,
you have to take drugs to deal with the side effects, and it just goes on, and
right.
it's crazy. But back to your point about the skin being sort of the mirror of your internal health. When we were first getting started, we contacted this doctor. His name was Dr. Nicholas Perricone, and he was a dermatologist, and he was promoting a book at the time called The Wrinkle Cure. And I remember I had the TV on in the background. I was actually out on my fishing boat, and I had a little TV on in the background, and I had PBS on, and they were playing a promotional campaign with this doctor talking about his book, The Wrinkle Cure. And I thought, what in the world is PBS doing promoting a wrinkle cure? It just sounded crazy. But I listened a little closer, and it turned out it was essentially a salmon diet.
You must have loved that, hearing that on your salmon
Well,
boat.
we hadn't even started the company yet. I was in the process of doing the business plan and trying to get up and running, and so I perked up, and I ended up writing him a letter. He was back in Connecticut, and I wrote him a letter, and I said, I'm going to start this company. You're telling people to eat salmon, and we're starting a company shipping salmon to people's homes, so we can make your recommendation, relevant to people, or
Right.
actionable, I guess is the word I'm looking for. And kind of sent off the letter, and this was at a time when we weren't making any money, and it was kind of like putting a letter in a bottle and throwing it over the side, hoping somebody finds it. I didn't really expect to hear back from him. Anyway, a couple of weeks later, his publicist calls, and they're really excited. Dr. Perricone's really excited, and he really wants to meet you and put you in his next book, and so on and so forth. So I ended up going out there and meeting with him, and that's when I first learned about the the benefits of these healthy fats and skin. And that book came out. Another book followed called The Perricone Prescription that was more of the same. And he's subsequently written 7 or 8 books, and every one of them, he's promoting fish and our company. So that's been a great. Vanity is a powerful motivator, and that's something he had figured out. And anyway, we got a lot of wonderful clients out of that, customers, and that we still serve. And but there's just so much more than skin health.
Right. If you eat a diet to promote healthy skin, you're also just, the nice side effect is you're promoting internal health also. Well, I just love it. I love what you do. I'm really excited to check out your breakfast sausages for my son, your salmon sausages. That's such a great alternative to pork sausages. Um, is there anything that you'd like to say to wrap up our interview today? Anything that was left unsaid that you'd like to share with the listeners?
Sure. Well, there are just so many different things. After all this time, I've heard so many stories, and we committed early on to education, and so we have been publishing a science-based newsletter almost from the beginning. I think there are over 1,000 original articles in our archive. So if you look at our website, you'll see on the menu up there, Learn, and I think there's a link there to our newsletter archive. And so, and you can search by condition. You can just put a search term into the
Oh,
search box, and
fun.
those will come up. So that's a great resource for a lot of information. One thing we didn't talk about was the issue of mercury, too much mercury, and another thing that's come up a lot is sort of the Fukushima radiation thing.
I was gonna touch on that, and I thought, oh man, he's just gonna think I'm a whack job if I bring that up.
No, no,
Maybe
no.
maybe I shouldn't have held back as an interviewer, but I was absolutely I was biting my tongue because I have friends who will not eat fish because of
Yes, yes.
Fukushima.
Well, we have probably done more testing than any seafood company in America, if not the world, and because our customers want to know. And
Hmm.
so if you just go on our website and type radiation in, I think a page will come up where we give results of, I think, 6 or 8 rounds, I don't know, many rounds of testing. We've gone to very credible labs, had up to 16 different species tested, and very reassuring. No evidence of radiation in the fish. But again, back to the fear-mongering headlines. People see
Right.
those, and that's what they remember. But the one thing I wanted to mention beyond that, if we still have a minute,
Yeah.
uh, this is very personal to me. One of the conferences I was at, there was a doctor speaking about a patient of his who had had traumatic brain injury,
Mm.
and they incorporated fish oil into. They didn't really think he was going to make it, or if he was going to. He was a victim of a mining collapse, and he'd been. I think 18 or 19 people died. He was the only one that survived. He was just hanging by a thread. He'd
Oh
had
my
organ failure.
gosh.
Anyway, they make a long story short, they got him. Dr. Barry Sears, who was has been a big proponent of
Hmm.
omega-3 therapy for a long time, partnered up with his doctors. They started giving intravenous fish oil
Wow.
because it contains sort of the bricks and mortar of the brain to repair the brain. It's powerfully anti-inflammatory. It's got all those other nutrients, micronutrients we mentioned. And well, actually, the fish has that. The fish oil is more just the omega-3s. But anyway, they gave him high-dose fish oil, and he walked out of the hospital. He had a family. He finished school. Just this miraculous recovery. Anyway, this doctor is giving this talk at the conference, and 2 weeks later, my daughter is in the intensive care unconscious with bacterial meningitis, severe encephalitis, brain swelling, and just that's another story. But the bottom line is, I had just heard this story, and so I asked the doctors if they could add fish oil to her feeding tube while she was in intensive care and conscious for 9 days. And of course, at first they were very skeptical and resisted, but eventually consented and did it. And she went on to, just had a recovery that the neurologists said that they had never seen anything like it. And since then, that was 10 years ago, and since then, there have just been all kinds of studies, evidence that fish oil is very neuroprotective, and not only from a therapeutic standpoint. If you have a brain injury, high dose fish oil can help recovery. But if you have a lot of omega-3 fats on board when you have a injury, so if you're in contact sports, soccer players, football players, whatever, and you have a lot of these omega-3s on board, the damage that can occur is reduced. The recovery is usually much faster. And so I'm happy to have the opportunity to share that story, because there are over 6 million brain injuries in this country every year. And
Hmm.
like to try to get that message out. A friend of mine wrote a book called When Brains Collide. When Brains Collide, and it tells that story and a lot of others. So thanks for the opportunity to share that.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so I mean, I love how the world works. I love how life works, whether it's divine intervention or serendipity, but the fact that you were at that conference and you heard that information and you were able to help your daughter a few weeks later. And I mean, I personally know of some people who have family members who've had brain injuries or TBIs, and passing this information along to them is going to make a big difference. So I'm excited to help as many people as possible to recover and heal and go on to utilize this information to prevent disease and create optimal health.
Yeah, and Ashley had mentioned that out of balance video. So if you go to that vitaltest.com page and scroll down, I think it's the third one over, and that's Dr. Lands that's showing up there in front. He's just a wonderful guy. He's 88 years old now. That's another thing that just fuels my passion, is come to know a lot of these guys that are octogenarians, and they're just so incredibly still engaged and vital. And he was at a conference I was at a couple of weeks ago, and he's taken notes, and another one is up there speaking to the crowd. And these are people who figured this out 30, 40, 50 years ago, 40 years ago. And so I've been living that way. And Dr. Crawford, who you'll see in that video, I went skiing with him 3 years ago when he was 84 years old for 4 days. For 4 days. How many 84-year-olds? And then the following year, he invited me to come skiing in the Swiss Alps with him at 85. And so it's just such a screaming endorsement for the benefits of, living this healthy lifestyle.
Gosh, I would love to have you back on the show anytime there's new information you have to share, or you want a soapbox to share your message and share more information. You're welcome back on the show. I know we could probably talk all day about the wonders of omega-3s and healthy, sustainable wild caught fish. And I really love that you're committed to sustainably sourced alternatives that will not only impact the environment in the best way possible, but impact the health of the consumer.
Well, thank you, Ashley. It's really been a joy to spend this time with you, and I'd love to come back sometime.
Do you feel like you're missing something? Are you searching for the right answers to solve your health issues? Do you feel like you should have more energy and mental clarity? With everything you're doing for your health, you may be missing one key component. Our body needs 90 essential nutrients every day to function optimally. 60 minerals, 12 amino acids, 2 fatty acids, and 16 vitamins each and every day. Because of the farming practices over the last 100 years, most of our food has 60% fewer vitamins and minerals compared to just 50 years ago. So if you aren't eating 8 cups of a variety of fruits and vegetables each day, you may be missing some of your essential nutrients. These are the raw building blocks the body needs to create new healthy tissue, healthy hormones, balanced digestive system, strong muscles, bones and joints, and maintain an optimal functioning nervous system. Especially if you're experiencing more stress, or if you've gone through an illness like an infection, that takes more resources. So if you're not consuming more vitamin C and more of all the 16 vitamins and all the 60 minerals when you're going through more stress, either physical stress, emotional stress, mental stress, those stressors take more nutrients to kind of survive those bumps in the road in life. And over time, that whittles away, that kind of depletes our nutrient tanks, our stores in our body. Without these 90 essential nutrients, things start to break down. Now, you've experienced these breakdowns. Maybe you get migraines. Maybe you're exhausted. Maybe your hormones are out of balance, your digestion's out of balance, or you have some aches and pains. Maybe you've even been diagnosed with something. You have a series of symptoms, and if those symptoms all look like something, then we can diagnose it, right? That's what MDs can do. MDs will treat these breakdowns with drugs and mask your symptoms. But if your body has a nutrient deficiency, no amount of drugs will fix the problem. 7 years ago, I embarked on a journey to cure my diabetes, infertility, PCOS, high blood pressure, and chronic adrenal fatigue. I felt like I was a mess. Through my research, I found a company that made natural supplements to address these nutrient needs. They formulated their supplements to exceed all standards of quality. Their minerals are the most bioavailable and absorbed by the body that I have ever found. After getting on their protocols for healthy hormones and blood sugar, along with their dietary recommendations for better health, I reversed my type 2 diabetes, I reversed my infertility, I no longer had high blood pressure, my energy and vitality came back, and after 6 years of trying to get pregnant with my husband before we found these supplements, once we got on these supplements, we were able to conceive our wonderful healthy son, who's now 3 years old, and he is amazing, and we would have never had that had we not found this company. Speaking of our son, he's also taking these supplements for optimal health. His pediatrician thinks they are amazing. If you'd like to give these supplements a try and see for yourself if you're experiencing a nutrient deficiency, please go to takeyoursupplements.com. That's takeyoursupplements.com. Their health coaches are phenomenal. I personally know all of them. They're amazing people. And I just want you to know, as my listener, I feel like I need to protect my listeners. I would never promote anything that I didn't 100% believe in and I didn't feel was healthy or good for you. I feel like you're my tribe, and I'm sharing this information. In fact, for the last 2 years, the only reason why I've been doing this podcast is so that I can help as many people as possible gain their health back. And so the health coaches at takeyoursupplements.com, I really trust that they will make sure that you're well taken care of. They will work with you to help determine the best protocol for your nutrient needs and work within your budget. They will also help to implement a holistic protocol that includes supporting a healthy diet and lifestyle. Go to takeyoursupplements.com, fill out the form, and one of their health coaches will get back to you really shortly. And then you guys can schedule a time to talk on the phone, and they will work with you to help you dial in all your nutrient needs. I really look forward to hearing about your experience with them. Please feel free to reach out to me. You can reach out to me in our Facebook group. Go to Facebook, search Learn True Health, and join our group. Let me know what you think about the wonderful health coaches at takeyoursupplements.com. And by the way, when you go to takeyoursupplements.com and you get assigned to a health coach, they're your health coach. You're not going to keep getting a different person every time. You get one person, and they work with you and they hold your hand for months down the road. They're there for you to support you month after month while you're on your nutrient protocol, and they're helping you dial in your nutrient needs. They're really wonderful like that. So I know you'll enjoy your experience with them, and I'd love to hear about your experience with them. Please feel free to, you can email me as well, ashley@learntruehealth.com. I love hearing success stories. Like I said, I've been working with a supplement company for my own health for the last 7 years, and I've reversed so many issues. I love sharing this information because I think that many of you will be able to resolve your issues with nutrition, just like I've seen many people do. With that said, go to takeyoursupplements.com, fill out your information, and a health coach is very excited to start working with you and helping you get your health back.